Yeah, yeah. The world is so small till it ain't.
Hi, and hello. Thank you for tuning into Stellar Sapiens. Today, we will be analyzing the new conceptualization of God and Resentiment through a deep dive of Friedrich Nietzsche's 1882 text, The Gay Science, and his 1887 text, The Genealogy of Morality. We will elaborate on the conceptualization of God through a modern-day truth seeker, Malcolm X, whose relationship with being labeled a madman relates to Nietzsche's take on the hypocrisy of religion and the importance of breaking out of cultural norms through the madman parable and the gay science. Nietzsche alludes to what it takes to become a free spirit and be able to overcome the truths that have shaped society for so long, with religion as a false safeguard. Next, we will analyze the relationship of morality and resentiment as it relates to archetypes in media and film, such as Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games and the Kim family in the 2019 film Parasite. We will see how the frame of complex scenes creates archetypes of slave morality, which Nietzsche alludes to in his writings of Genealogy of Morality, and how it is important to find balance between master and slave morality. Now, in this section, titled The Modern Day Madman, I will start off by giving context by reading from The Gay Science, 1882, The Parable of the Madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, "I seek God, I seek God." As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. "Has he got lost?" asked one. "Did he lose his way, like a child?" asked another. "Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all the suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions. Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying? Are through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history. Hitherto. Here the madman fell silent, and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last, he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. "I have come too early," he said. "Then my time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further on the same day. The madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo, let out and called to account. He is said always to have replied nothing. But what after all these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? The end. Close. Madman Parable, Nietzsche. Wow, what a text. I just want to say this text struck me when we read it in class and also when I read it by myself, but it is important to point out that the perspective of this parable is that the madman is speaking to the people of the market. And this is a POV of people who no longer believe in God. The non-believers, per se. Those who are truth seekers. Those who are looking past what is being fed to them through the religious lens. Alright? Now, I need to point out that the lens that I will be utilizing, the perspective of the madman's role as a truth seeker, is that he is a critic establishing values and analyzing the madman's isolation. Now, in reference of the madman to Malcolm X, in one of his famous speeches, Malcolm X said, "If you're not ready to die for it, take the word freedom out of your vocabulary." This stark proclamation parallels Nietzsche's madman holding up a lantern in daylight, demanding that people recognize the profound implications of their choices. Malcolm X's madness lay in his ability to force people to confront their complicity in a broken system and demand a radical reimagination of society. When we're referring to a broken system, in the madman parable, it's specifically noting that we are basing society on almost an unrealistic expectation of God not being dead, because God is dead and we have yet to mourn him. Now, next, confronting a dead God, the myth of racial equality in America. Malcolm X shattered the comforting illusions of racial harmony and gradual progress often promoted by mainstream civil rights movements in the 1950s and 1960s, and by white liberal society. Like the madman declaring God's death, Malcolm X exposed the hypocrisy of America's claims to freedom, democracy, and Christian morality, arguing that these values were and are systemically denied to Black people. It's important to point this out, this dead God myth of racial equality in America, because the madman is pointing out that God is dead, and Malcolm X is pointing out that there is no racial equality in America. It has not been established or even faintly imagined, and this distinction of confronting a dead God is important to know, especially in context of Malcolm X. Next, Malcolm X as a challenger of hypocrisy and assimilation. Malcolm X critiqued both the dominant white culture and segments of the Black community for accepting subservience, similar to how the madman is pointing out people's subservience to this false truth that they are being fed through a religious lens. And Malcolm X also points out this assimilation into a system which is inherently oppressing Black people. His advocacy for self-determination, Black pride, and self-defense was revolutionary, similar to how the madman is approaching his take on this speech, but also deeply unsettling to those invested in the status quo. Now, when we're looking at the madman parable, you can see how it is uncomfortable for people who are believers to be hearing what this madman is saying, that their God is dead, that they have killed him. This might be uncomfortable to those who are believers of God, who still believe that he is alive. It will be uncomfortable to hear, yet it is so important to have this madman parable, because it is exposing these true realities that we have tried to conceal through societal norms that some people have accepted at the time. This aligns with Nietzsche's critique of solely clinging to slave morality, where the oppressed internalize their oppression as a virtue. Next, I want to point out Malcolm X being misunderstood and marginalized, similar to the Madman. Malcolm X was labeled dangerous, divisive, and an extremist by mainstream media, politicians, and even some civil rights leaders. However, his willingness to call out systemic injustice, even when it meant opposing powerful figures or institutions, often left him standing alone in isolation, the same way Nietzsche is depicting this madman. Overall, it's important to draw distinctions towards modern figures such as Malcolm X into what Nietzsche tries to point out about society and its lack of awareness of the hypocrisy of institutions such as religion, as it relates to civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. Overall, the madman parable Nietzsche points out draws into further examples of why it's important to seek truth and his push towards non-believing and trying to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable and we're trying to unconform from society. Now, moving on to the genealogy of morality and slave and master morality as it relates to resentment. First, to give context, I need to point out Nietzsche's first essay in the Genealogy of Morality, 1887. He points out, the good and evil versus good and bad, and this specific passage on slave and master morality in section 10 speaks on resentment. Nietzsche states, the slave revolt in morality begins when the resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. The resentment of those being who are prevented from a genuinely active reaction and who compensate for that with a merely imaginary vengeance, while all noble morality grows out of a triumph self-affirmation. Slave morality from the start says no to what is outside, other, a non-self. And this no is a creative act, this transformation of the glance which confers value. This necessary projection towards that is outer instead of back into itself, that is inherent in resentment. In order to arise, slave morality always requires first an opposing world, a world outside of itself. Psychologically speaking, it needs external stimuli in order to act at all. Its action is basically reaction. The reverse is the case with the noble method of valuing. It acts and grows spontaneously. It seeks its opposite only to affirm itself even more thankfully, with even more rejoicing. Its negative concept of low, common, bad is only a pale contrasting image after the fact in relation to its positive basic concept. Intoxicated with life and passion, we are noble, good, beautiful, and happy. When the noble way of evaluating makes a mistake and abuses reality, that happens with inference to the sphere which it does not know well enough. Indeed, the sphere it has strongly resisted learning the truth about uncertain circumstances. It misjudges the sphere. It despises the sphere of the common man, the low people. On the other hand, we should consider that even assuming that the fact of contempt, of looking down or looking superior, falsifies the image of the person despised, such distortion will fall short by a long way of the distortion with which the repressed hatred and vengeance of the powerless man mistakenly assault his opponent. Naturally, in fact, in contempt there is too much negligence, too much dismissiveness, too much looking away and impatience, all mixed together, even too much feeling of joy for it, to be capable of converting its object into a truly distorted monster. This will be important to keep in mind while we draw similarities in the archetypes of these films. on slave morality and cultural references. I also want to point out Toulouse Salome on Beyond Good and Evil, who elaborates on the double connotation of values of the two slave and master morality. She points out that a man's soul would have remained flat without these two moralities constantly going against each other. Living in a culture to tame our wilder instincts to survive in this society, it's important to be able to look inside of ourselves and analyze how these different forces are repressing or enlightening those different forms of morality. Since we're always pulled towards slave or master morality, the greatest people are those who can harness this contrast. Which is why I want to allude towards how this specific archetype of slave morality is depicted in movies. For slave morality references, I will be pointing out specifically Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games and the Kim family in the film Parasite. Now, the critique of power, next title is the critique of power in media. As a response to the dominance of masters with values of humility, community, and compassion, often positioning the powerless and morally superior. Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games exemplifies the underdog who triumphs through resilience and morality. Themes of slave morality in the film Hunger Games from Katniss Everdeen highlight her humility and empathy and her resistance to authority. Her self-sacrifice, as she sacrifices herself for the greater good of the revolution, and sacrificing herself in place of her sister's life. Her moral integrity, as she destroys or attempts to destroy the system of control that has been keeping others suppressed in her district and other districts in the film. And the justice she tries to compel over revenge. This is vital, because the slave morality, we see how resentment can build through slave morality, but the character Katniss Everdeen is pulling from slave and master morality as she is choosing justice over revenge. In the film Parasite by Bong Joon-ho, it is explicitly critiques the elite Park family, who are the master morality, while highlighting the struggles of the marginalized Kim family, which is the slave morality. The Kim family as the underdogs who are marginalized and oppressed highlights in those characters the empathy and solidarity between the family, and the reversal of power as the Kim's family is on a quest for a better life, fueled by resentment and later on frustration. I think this is a very important distinction to make, specifically on slave morality, because there is a way to go about utilizing slave morality, which resents master morality. You see, the Kim family is on a completely different class than the Park family. So as the Kim family is serving the Park family, you can see their struggle to balance their slave morality, because they are constantly feeling this resentment, they aren't even thinking of the things that I'm thinking of. I am constantly below them. How can I get to this master morality? And that gap is forcing them to build resentment. The moral complex scenes where they are forced to confront the limits of their lives in the face of systemic inequality highlights the dangers of a society where the oppressed are forced to adapt the tactics of the powerful to survive. Overall, the film ties into Nietzsche's will to power and the drives that shift for the Kim family as they seek power. This work resonates with those who embody slave morality because it calls out the powerful power differentials in both The Hunger Games and Parasite, which explore dynamics between the oppressed and the powerful. In these narratives, slave morality offers a critique of master morality. In The Hunger Games, Katniss's rebellion is not about her own glorification, but about disrupting a system that values power, wealth, and control. She becomes the face of slave morality, standing for the oppressed districts and fighting to destroy a system that values the strong and wealthy over the weak and poor. In Parasite, The Kim family represents the frustration and bitterness of the oppressed, using cleverness and solidarity to break into the world of the rich. While the film critiques their morally questionable actions, it also exposes the deep inequality that forces them into such measures. The tragic conclusion shows the devastating consequences when the disenfranchised are pushed to extremes, revealing the cyclical nature of oppression. In both works, slave morality is ultimately about survival, resistance, and the moral complexities of those who are forced to navigate systems of power. It's not a morality of passive submission, but rather one that finds strength in solidarity, compassion, and sometimes moral ambiguity in the fight against injustice. Now, to sum up the modern day conceptualization of God and resentment in the lens of Nietzsche, and in the modern day lens, in the example of Malcolm X, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games, and the 2019 film Parasite. It's important to note that through exploring Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical ideas in The Gay Science and the Genealogy of Morality, contextualizing them with modern-day examples, like mentioned before, I have been able to delve into how Nietzsche's parable of the madman examines the critiques of religion and societal norms through Malcolm X, who portrayed a modern-day madman and challenged systemic injustices by confronting racial inequality and hypocrisy in America, much like Nietzsche's call to reimagine values beyond traditional morality. This analysis transitions to Nietzsche's concepts of master morality and slave morality, focusing on the portrayal in media. Katniss Everdeen exemplifies slave morality through her resistance, self-sacrifice, and fight for justice in The Hunger Games, while Parasite critiques systemic inequality with the marginalized Kim family embodying themes of resentment and cleverness to survive. Both of these narratives illustrate the tension between oppression and power, highlighting Nietzsche's ideas about a creative potential of slave morality. Ultimately, I push to underscore the relevance of Nietzsche's philosophy through the analysis of cultural archetypes and power dynamics, advocating for a balance between master and slave morality to foster self-determination, resilience, and societal transformation. Now, I hope this analysis of Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality and The Gay Science has helped people, or helped you as the viewer, understand more of how Nietzsche's philosophy from the 1800s still relates to 21st century examples, and how we continue to try to conceptualize those philosophical ideas of morality and the madman parable. I think it's so important to continue to analyze this philosophy because it helps us conceptualize how society still has not found ways to reimagine these structures under God and religion, and how we ourselves have not learned to overcome our own drives of slave versus master morality and to look within ourselves. I think Nietzsche truly does a great job of analyzing how we constantly are, how these complex drives are constantly fighting, and how the greatest people in the world have learned to master that. So thank you for tuning into Stella Sapiens today. I hope that this podcast was enlightening, or this video essay was enlightening, and I hope to do more of these in the future. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.